Good. We're here. Hello, Anna from Russia with Books.
Hello. Hello,
Hello.
everyone.
And hello, Darren Shan. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm very good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
We are thrilled to have you, and I'm glad we could coordinate the timings well. Because Anna and I won't witter on for too long. I'm kind of infamous for my wittering, but Anna and I have recently wrapped up reading your Demonata series. For me, it was the second time, and for Anna, it was her first time. And we've had this really wonderful kind of experience kind of talking through your work. And so when I met you very briefly at a signing in Glasgow, I sort of semi-bullied you into coming on, and we're appreciative of having you here.
It's a pleasure. It was delightful. I'd seen your review for the first four books, I think, wasn't it, that you did, or first five or six? I can't remember now, but I remember seeing that a while back. So it was like nice seeing you in Glasgow. So no,
Yeah,
it's always lovely to meet some proper Shansters.
absolutely.
You signed my book. David was very kind to send me a book signed by you. Thank you very much.
That's what I was there for.
Can I get started by asking you this question, Darren, and then Anna, feel free just to jump in whenever, okay? But your books were one of the books, I would actually say the main books that were quite kind of passed around when I was in primary school, and I'd say secondary school as well. Like there'd always be a copy somewhere in the classroom during personal reading time, and at that point it was your Saga of Darren Shan, your Cirque du Freak series, and also your Demonata was kind of getting published at that point as well. Now, I'm a secondary school teacher, and it's really interesting for me because just before a summer vacation, I was circulating my classroom and I saw a kid with a copy of Zombie on his desk. And so it was really lovely for me because I was actually reading Demonata at the time. And I wanted to ask you, just to kick things off, what is it about your books that have kind of grasped so many different children? And I know you do adult fiction as well, which we can get to. But for your young adult fiction, what is it that's kind of had it standing the test of time, in your view?
Um, it's hard. I think readers are a better place to answer that question than writers. I think every writer, when they're writing, thinks they're writing a book that's going to change history and change the world and be the standout book of their generation. Very, very few ever are. It's readers who decide. That's one of the things I love about the world of books. It's very much a democratic progress. Publishers will spend a lot of money promoting books and things. Writers will put loads of work into everything. But at the end of the day, it's always down to the readers. When I wrote Cirque du Freak, the publishing world considered it absolutely worthless. Cirque du Freak was turned down by 20 different publishers. Every publisher my agent sent it to back in 1997 were either horrified by it or bored by it. They just didn't want to publish it, didn't want to touch it. With a bars poll, we literally couldn't give it away. And one of the things they said was, there's going to be a huge uproar if this book ever gets published. It's so dark for a children's book. Parents will be crying out against it. Libraries and bookstores won't stock it. Teachers will be condemning it. They didn't want to deal with all this chaos that they thought it would unleash. There would be this huge controversy about it. Then, luckily, HarperCollins took a chance on it. It came out January 2000. And there was no controversy. Readers decided, actually, no, this is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with this book. It's a very positive book. It's as dark as it is. It's putting forward this message about this boy who sacrifices everything to save the life of his friend. And it became this hugely, the cornerstone of the founding, I should say, of my whole career. About Cirque du Freak, there's no Saga of Darren Shan, there's no Demonata, there's no Zombie. Darren Shan would have died a death back in 1997 because I was writing for adults as well. That's where I thought my career was going to lead me. I always assumed I was going to be primarily a writer for adults. I wrote Cirque du Freak as a side project. It was a bit of fun. But the readers decided, this is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, Shan. This is where you're going. And they basically forced me down the path of being a best-selling global author. So I blame you guys for everything that's happened.
But I feel like...
I don't... Sorry, yes, Anna?
No.
Yeah, I was going to say, sure, I don't know. And I think that's part of the joy of a really good book. You shouldn't really know why it's a good book. Books that are written to hit a demographic and written for the market, they're fine. There's loads of those types of books around. And I read lots of those books every year, and they're perfectly fine. But the standout books, the ones that grab you, the ones that are still being talked about 25 years after they're written, there's a bit of magic in those. And I don't think anyone really knows what that magic is. No one really knows why Harry Potter went so crazy when it did. It just came out of nowhere and turned the world upside down. Reading books about magicians before, about magic and all sorts of things. They're very good books. You break them down into constituent parts. There's nothing in those books that says why they are so successful. It's just readers decided there's something wonderful about these books and they ran with them. And to a rather lesser extent, but still a very nice extent, they did the same with mine.
Anna, what were you going to say?
No, I was just thinking about, while I was listening, I was actually thinking, because you mentioned that many publishers said that the reason why they didn't want to touch your books just because they're so dark. But I think the way I feel, and probably David may agree with me because we were discussing it before, that the darkness, the fact of them being so dark is probably the reason why they're so relevant still, because there are not so many books that are so dark and aimed at children, because they're almost like breaking the stereotype of children books, and probably it keeps them very exciting for children. And I was actually thinking about it. Why are you drawn to horror genre? Why did you decide to work in this particular genre and make this very dark books for children?
It's just what I've always been drawn to. I can remember seeing my first Dracula film when I was 5 or 6 years of age. And I know I was that age because I saw it when I was still living in London, and I moved to Ireland, where I've lived ever since, when I was 6. And I saw this when I was still in my flat in London. So I know even at 5 or 6, I loved horror. I loved scary stories. I loved watching horror movies. My parents were very liberal for the time, and they let me watch pretty much anything I wanted to see. I've just always been drawn to it. I read all different types of books and watch all different types of movies and shows, all different genres. But horror was my first love. It was the thing that excited me most as a child, and especially as a teenager. I loved exploring the darkness. I loved when you went on a journey where you weren't sure who was going to be alive at the end of it, where you weren't sure what was waiting around the corner. I often compared it to a roller coaster ride. Roller coasters, they're fast, they're scary, they're frenetic, but they're also safe. In horror books and horror movies, it's a safe form of horror. If you're being trapped home at night through streets by some dodgy-looking guy, there's nothing entertaining about that. If you're watching it or reading about it, it's a story, it's entertaining. You're safe. As the reader or the viewer, you are safe. And so it's a way of exploring the darkness, but in a safe way. And I don't know, I just always loved it. It was just something I was naturally drawn to. I sometimes get parents coming up to me when I do sign-ins like I did in Glasgow, and they say, Mr. Shan, I'm a bit concerned my child's going to have nightmares reading their book. What can you say to assuage my fears? I always sort of shrug and say, well, I hope they do have nightmares. That's the whole point of a horror book. You read horror books to be scared. You read them to get that frisson of danger. And so, I love it when my books give people nightmares. They very rarely do. I get loads and loads of letters and emails over the years, and I've had very, very few from people saying they've had nightmares reading my books. Usually they've been crying. My books are very emotional roller coasters. But I love, even when I veer away from straightforward horror, and I don't really think the Saga of Darren Shan is a horror series. As much as it was marketed as one in most territories, it wasn't everywhere. In Japan, it was sold as a fantasy series, and other countries in the Far East. And when I wrote Set the Freak, I did think it was a horror book. But the series, I don't think, is a horror series. It's an action-adventure series more than anything else. It has horror elements, there's fantasy elements, there's some sci-fi in there. There's all sorts of things going on. But, I don't think it is really a horror series, but it is a series that explores the darkness. And that's something that most of my books do. Pretty much everything I write, even if it's a thriller, it's about that darkness. It's about going into the unknown, because it's always fascinating me. I like thinking about what might be out there, what else is there in the world, in the universe. It's, it can be a very, very boring world without that fantastical element to it. And even though I don't believe in the fantastical, I still like to believe it could be real.
I found it interesting that Cirque du Freak was the one that people thought might have been too dark, because in my view, Demonata is a significant step up in terms of the darkness. And when I said that in the discussion we did on my channel, Anna, someone commented, wait till you get to Zombie because you've seen nothing yet. It seems like there's different levels. And I don't know if that's maybe because they're aimed at slightly different age ranges, Darren, or you're just doing different things with different series. You're experimenting as you go.
Yeah, I've never done the same thing over and over. I think if you were to just not read my books and just look at the sort of synopsis, you think, oh, he's doing 12 books about vampires, he's doing 10 books about demons, he's doing 12 books about zombies. You're probably thinking there's a similar structure running throughout those series. And those who've read them will know there isn't. Each one works in its own terms, it does its own things. I'm always looking to try new stuff. I'm not an author. I wish I was an author who could just do the same book over and over, because I love reading those books. I love a detective series. I like getting a good detective series like Harry Bosch, and you know what you get in each one each time round, and they can be great writing. Lots of genre fiction like that. It's top drawer writing. But as a writer, it's not what excites me. I just can't do it. I wish I could. My agent was always trying to get me to do a straight up thriller series. He said, "Darren, please, it'd be so good." But even though I like reading those books, as a writer, I'm not drawn to writing them. So I just go wherever the story leads me, and each time it's different. The Saga of Darren Shan, as I say, it's not really that gory. In certain freak, no one even gets killed. A boy gets buried alive, but he gets dug up again, so that's all right. But Demon Art was a big step up. Demon Art was really me pushing the envelope. I was billed as this horror writer, the master of YA horror, as my publishers like to market me. And I thought, okay, let's see how far we can go. Because I'd had all this negative pushback to the Saga of Darren Shan, but I got away with it. And as we were coming towards the end of that series, I wasn't by any means a best-selling author, certainly not in the UK at that stage. But the books were starting to break through, they were spreading, word of mouth was helping them to build. And I had this opportunity to see how far I could go. And with Demon Art, it was me sort of seizing that opportunity full on and saying, right, let's see how much I can get away with. And the answer was pretty much anything, except anything sexual. That was where my publishers drew the line. For children's books, certainly the sort of type books I was writing, they didn't want any sexual references, because their thinking was, parents do actually buy the books. And that's what parents get most riled about. They don't mind if you're ripping off heads left, right and centre. You have a bit of kissing going on. Oh, they don't like that. So that was the only times I ever really ran into editorial issues where my editor would say to me, look, can we sort of change this? Can we do something different? But when it came to the gore, I saw once I got running, they pretty much let me off. And we never had any real negative feedback. In the 25 years, you get the occasional school that might, a teacher, a parent might say, oh, this is horrible filth, ban it. And, it's been, every book, that happens pretty much every book for some reason. But it's never been properly challenged. It's never been banned outright. There's never been this negative feedback. I think because people have seen positivity of it all, as dark and as gruesome as these books are, they're about children overcoming the odds to seize victory. They're about kids who sacrifice everything to save their family and their friends, who put their lives on the line. They're very, very moralistic books in a bizarre, blood-drenched type of way. And I think that has come through, that message. Parents read to see that, to sort of, when kids are talking about the books with them, they must be saying good things, because we've never had this real sort of negative wave of feedback that my publishers had anticipated, even with the Demon Art, even with Zombie. And Zombie, of all the series I've written, I think Zombie is probably the most disturbing, because it's the most realistic. It's a zombie apocalypse, yes, but the real villains are human characters who are doing these horrible, twisted things. There's a character in there called Dan Dan, who I named after one of my wife's cute interviews when he was a little boy. But he's a cross between, Jimmy Savile and Steve, all sorts of horrific real life people. But and that series, I think, is the most disturbing, because it's the one where it hits hardest. It's not as grisly or as gory. Well, actually, it's quite as gory as Demon Art. Demon Art goes further, but in a more fantastical way. Zombie was a more realistic horror series. And even with Zombie, there was never really the negative backlash that everyone was expecting.
It's interesting hearing you speak, because I know we have a mutual kinship in that we're both big fans of Stephen King. And I think it's interesting hearing you speak, because I think a lot of this stuff is very similar. Because I think Stephen King, with his writing, okay, he goes to some very, very, very dark places, but they're usually, and I would say 90% of King books, there's usually some kind of uplifting character or uplifting message towards the end. So it's just interesting hearing you speak, listening to those parallels.
I've read books. I've read horror books where it just goes full on dark and it just goes into all the horror, and that's all there is to it. It gets boring pretty quickly. It's got to be about characters you care about, characters you can connect with, who are trying to do good things. You can be nihilistic. Zombie is certainly a very nihilistic series, but you've still got to have that glimmer of light. I think, especially if you're writing for a YA market, because otherwise it just gets too bleak and it becomes crushing and it loses the joy of it. And more than anything else, I think books should be joyous. Books should be entertaining. It might be dark entertainment, but you've got to have that positivity coming through. If you don't have, I don't think you're going to make that connection with readers that, you know, Saga Darren Shan and Dig Night Own Zombie have made.
Sorry, I actually wanted to comment before. I had to step out. I'm really sorry because I realized that my battery was dying. It was an emergency moment. But when you were talking about your series in your previous comment, I was almost feeling that the Search the Freak was almost like a test for the darkness level you can potentially present in children's books. And probably I feel like the level of darkness is ramping up, and I'm actually very excited about it. Maybe we'll get something even darker in the future. But another thing I was actually thinking, I personally find it very weird that people are more sensitive to any type of sexual content, erotic content in children's books, but they are sort of okay with gore and extreme violence. I was personally thinking always that why love is being banned, but people and parents are okay for their children to read something with a very high violence content. I was thinking, what do you think about it? Because I personally found it very interesting and weird, to be honest.
It's never made sense to me. But at the same time, you've got to appreciate that is the world in which we live in. I took a very sociological approach to my vampires in the Saga of Darren Shan. I thought, okay, they're not going to live forever. They're not evil monsters, but we do drink blood to survive. They only come out at night. They live for a very long time. And I thought, well, what would a society of people actually be like if they were like that? And so, yeah, as much as I drew upon the old Dracula stories and all the horror films I'd seen over the years, I also went back to when I was at university, I did sociology. I did a year of anthropology. And so I was thinking of tribes like the Masai Mara, the ancient Celts in Ireland and Scotland. And I was drawn to these sorts of societies. Now, my vampires, most of them are a few hundred years old. So my thinking was they would be very, very masculine, very sort of against women, but you know, they weren't going to have a lot of women in their ranks. They were actually open to having women in, but you had to toe the line exactly the same way man would do. They made no allowances. And so I figured, since there's so few female vampires, you've got, you know, a few thousand male vampires who don't mix much with humans, you know, they're going to be getting it on with each other quite a bit. There's going to be quite a high rate of homosexuality among these vampires. And when Darren was going to develop a Vampire Mountain, I did think about having little love rooms that were going to be there, where, yeah, the vampires would go in and do their thing. I just thought that would be what they would do. But I knew if I put that into the books, you know, first of all, I don't think it would have got past my editor and the publisher. And if it had done, that would have been the only topic of conversation people would be having about it. And everything else, I think, would have been lost. You know, there would have been uproar about it. It shouldn't be. You know, that's just, you know, reality is there would have been. And sometimes, you know, you've got to toe certain lines. Even if you don't want to, you just got to realise, look, if I do this, it's going to take focus away from where I want to go with the story. You know, that was just a background detail. I thought it was, you know, a natural background detail, but I knew it would have been, yeah, it would have made a splash. And what the risk would have been, the rest of the story would have been lost then against the background of that. So, but yeah, it makes no sense to me. I don't know. Yeah, it's just the society we've built for ourselves, where, you know, people get so hung up about it. We've got all the trans debates going on at the moment, and people get angry, and I don't know why. It saddens me. You know, I just think, as long as you're not doing any harm to anybody else, yeah, let people do what they want, let them live how they want to live. And I think that's something we should be telling children and bringing children upon to. To be fair, the world has changed a lot in positive ways since I was a kid. Yes. You know, I grew up in a time when homosexuality was still illegal in Ireland, where I live, which, you know, seems astonishing these days. You know, my kids are grown up and they know there's nothing wrong about it, and, you know, we know you don't use it as a slur term, as a term of hate. Yeah, we sometimes, with all the negative background chatter we get from the internet and, you know, sites like Facebook and Twitter and so on, it's, you know, there's a lot of good changes in the world over the last 20, 30, 40 years. The world, in many ways, is more positive. It's just, you know, sometimes it's hard to see that with everything going on. But yeah, the whole sexuality versus gore thing, you know, in an ideal world, it would be the other way around for me as well. But,
you know,
for some strange reason, it's not.
There's
I agree.
two things that I'd like to say to that. First of all, as a teacher, I think this is a really interesting conversation. I used to work at a school in Kuwait, and the school literally had me, if the word kiss or something, even the word kiss was in a book, they'd have me get a black marker and literally scrub it out. It was that fierce.
Yeah.
But any violence, that like all of it, all the way through, is totally fine.
I found it bizarre.
Yeah. I think there's different cultures have different willingness to accept this in their fiction. I know some cultures.
There's different places around the world where it would be very, very different.
Yeah.
But obviously, in the West, in England, America, Europe, but all of Europe, some parts will be different. But yeah, the bits where we've grown up, it is that imbalance, and it is an imbalance. But there are authors working out there who are addressing it and doing really, really good books which tackle it straight on. But yeah, someone who was more into sort of whole fantasy sort of thing, it's not my main focus. So that was why I had to sort of toe the political line.
I have another follow-up, if that's okay. It's a slight tangent. Sometimes on my channel, I really enjoy kind of interviewing kind of indie authors. And I recently found out just by doing a deep dive that your Archibald Locke series was self-published. Is that correct? I was just wondering what the difference was like for you writing Archibald Locke, because my understanding is you wrote a bit of it and then decided to self-publish. What that experience was like compared to writing stuff that was going through traditional publication.
Yeah, all the way through. It's not just Archibald Locke. All my adult books these days are self-published.
Okay.
I've got two careers going on. I've got the very successful career where I've been traditionally published, and I've got this sort of a self-published career which hasn't been quite so successful. I haven't really made a go to self-publishing. Some writers do. I've got a couple of very good friends who used to write children's books, and they've got into writing for adults now for crime novels, and they've had huge success. But yeah, you've got to sort of really hit certain points to really make it work as a self-publisher. You've got to give readers exactly what they want because they're searching for very specific things. And I've never been interested in hitting points. I will just tell these weird stories, and I hope I find an audience with them. Yeah, Archibald Locke was a weird one because I thought, I just wrote it the same way I wrote all my other series. It wasn't as dark. Going back to what Anna was saying there a while ago about the series getting progressively darker and will it go any darker after that? I've sort of drawn away from it in recent years. I went so dark with Demonata and then with Zombie. I just sort of felt naturally, okay, I want to go somewhere else with the stories now. And Archibald Locke's was a much lighter fantasy story, which didn't have the real darkness of any of my other series. And it's done very, very well with readers, but everyone in the publishing world hated it. My agent hated it, and the editors he showed it to hated it. Nobody saw any worth in it. It was like Research the Freak. Unfortunately, this time, I just couldn't get someone to get behind me and take a risk in it. So I published it myself. They've had a very, very good response. You can see in Goodreads, Amazon, the sort of scores they've had, the ratings they've had from people. Readers have really enjoyed them, but they haven't reached the same sort of audience because I don't have those marketing tools that would help me take them. They've done all right. They've done okay, but I always feel I'm always hoping they will be rediscovered one day. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you get a Saga of Darren Shan or Demonata TV show down the line, and interest in the books renews, that somebody will come to Archibald Locke's and rediscover it and go, oh, this is really good. Maybe I sort of maybe they're not as good as I think they are, but based on the reader response, I do think they are. But it was a real shame. It sort of broke my heart in a way because I really, like of all my series, I put my heart and body into it, and I've spent several years of my life working on each one. 6 or 7 years for Saga Darren Shan, for Demonata, for Zombie, and to sort of put all that work in and then be told, no, we don't want to publish it. It was hard. Luckily, because of the internet and self-publishing, I was able to get the books out there. With Research the Freak, nearly 30 years ago, if HarperCollins hadn't taken a chance on it, that would have died. I wouldn't have been able to release it because you just couldn't do it back then unless you could do vanity publishing, print a few hundred copies, but they're not going to get out into the world. The great thing about the internet now, it does allow you to put your story out there, and some of them sometimes they do get picked up and they do become word of mouth successes. But I've got these two parallel careers going. Dealing with a sort of traditional publishing and indie publishing, and it's interesting. For me, it's always been about stories. It's always been I write the stories and then I try and get them out there, and it's lovely when they go big like Saga did and Demonata did. But if they don't, and I've got to self-publish them, then I'll do that. I'll always serve the needs of the story.
I'm actually thinking maybe it's because of... Sorry?
I just said we have some reading to do, Anna. That's all.
Yes, definitely. And I was actually thinking now when you were discussing this other self-published series, I should definitely check it out, maybe for some less dark material. But I was actually thinking maybe it's happening because publishing industry being sometimes a bit more rigid sort of profiled you in this horror genre author. And when they saw that you produce something different, they were less, or like, let's say, more reluctant to publish it just because they thought maybe it will not sell as well, just because people already recognize you as one type of an author. I don't know. That's just an idea for me.
No,
But that was actually,
definitely. But yeah, they love pigeonhole writers. They love to know exactly what they're putting
yeah.
out there, and they love to sell you in just one particular way. My favourite book out of all the books that were written was The Thin Execution, standalone fantasy novel that came out, I think, after the Demonata, if I remember correctly. But I didn't really like that. My publishers, they did publish it, and it did quite well, but they didn't push it the same way they pushed other books of mine because it was a fantasy novel. It wasn't straight up horror, and that's not what they wanted from Darren Shan. They wanted novels set in the modern world that tell pure horror stories. But I've had a strange career where I've had this huge genre success, but without ever playing the games of having what most authors have to do that normally. I just I write what I write. I've been very, very lucky. Some of that has been very hugely successful. Other books I've written haven't been. But they do love to pigeonhole. It was the same way when I was starting out. I can remember in the 1990s when I was first trying to get published, and it was even back then. It was you have to write for a certain genre for a certain market. Publishers don't like writers who write different types of books, and it's just got more and more like that since then. Again, it's going back to readers. That's what most readers want. Most readers like knowing if they read a new Terry Pratchett book, they want to. Well, there's no new Terry Pratchett books anymore, unfortunately. But when he was coming out, they knew what they wanted from Terry Pratchett. They know what they want from Stephen King, even though Stephen King has actually written lots of different types of books, but they always get marketed with the sort of the eye on the horror market. But he gets away with it. But they know what they want, the readers, and publishers and booksellers, they sometimes bear the brunt of the blame when people are moaning about authors being pigeonholed. But a lot of it's coming from the readership. Readers, they want to be told what this is, and they want to know. They want to go looking for a horror book. They don't want, if they go for a new Darren Shan book and it's not horror, and that's all they want, they're going to get huff about it. So I can understand it. It's, as a reader, I like to read widely. I like to read different types of books. I don't mind when authors do different things. I quite like it. One of my favourite authors is Dan Simmons.
Oh, mate, yeah.
Different genres.
Yeah.
I still need to read him.
He's fabulous.
He's done pure sci-fi, pure horror, pure fantasy, thrillers, all sorts of things. He's never shackled himself, and I love that. But for a lot of readers, that's not what they want.
But for Dan Simmons, I adore Dan Simmons. I think it's kind of a similar thing, right? Where his big series, like Hyperion, is huge, and The Terror got put into a TV series. But you have the hard case novels are also wonderful, and it's this similar thing. Or what was the Sherlock Holmes one he did, or The Abominable? There's so he also, and maybe I can link this back to you.
I haven't read that one yet.
Oh, it's good. Don't listen to the reviews. The Abominable is fabulous. But I think there's if I could go back to the Demonata for a minute, I do notice, just talking about publishers want one thing from authors. One thing I noticed, I think Anna, we were talking about it, is the amount of they're all 10 horror books in the Demonata, but they're 10 very different books. And when we were talking about them on our calls, Anna, it definitely felt like each one is pretty distinct. Like you have Beck, which is my favorite, the one I did the review on, which is this kind of very
my favorite as well.
Fabulous, the dark, gloomy sense, almost like this doom-laden book, which is very different from Slaughter, which is almost reads to me like a send up to sort of the horror movie genre, which it is. And then you have like Wolf Island, which is almost reads to me like a war movie sort of a thing. And I love how, I don't really have a question here, just a compliment, but I love how all in the Demonata books, there's different almost modes of horror. I don't know how deliberate that was.
Oh yeah, as I said, there's no set structure in my series. Demonata was me at my wildest. It started out originally as sort of standalone books. I wrote Lord Loss, was the first one I wrote, but the next one I wrote was actually Beck.
Oh, interesting.
And then the third and fourth were Blood Beast and Demon Apocalypse. Then I wrote Slaughter. And it wasn't until I wrote Demon Thief, which was the second book published, but the sixth book that I wrote, that everything fell into place and everything connected. And I realised what the structure was going to be and put it all together. So, yeah, I don't have a favourite series, but Demon Hunter is the one I'm proudest of because it's the one that stretched me the furthest. It's the one I don't know how I pulled it off. I could never set out to write that again. You know, if all the books were pulped and I had to rewrite it from scratch, there's so much of it, I just wouldn't know where to start. I look back at it now and it's just this big, amazing beast that shouldn't work because there's all these different genres and types of stories going on, but somehow it does. It just all comes together. It all connects up. There was, it's a bizarre series. I love it. It's just so out there. And as I say, if you ever try to describe it to anyone, it's a very hard series to sum up in a few short sentences or even paragraphs. There's so much going on. There's all these different styles. You know, like Wolf Island, like you say, it was a war movie, but also a James Bond sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it was that sort of like Doctor No, you got an island, but instead of being full of supervillains, it's full of werewolves.
Yeah.
But I had a ball, didn't I? That was just so much fun to write. Very, very challenging, very, very hard to write because like I said, it wasn't until book 6, but I actually realised that I could make it work. I thought I might have to junk Beck. Like Beck is one of my favourites from the series as well.
Yeah.
But
That's the
back
best.
when I was but back when I was struggling to make a series out of it, I had 3 books about Grubbs Grady, but no way to fit Beck into those books. So I was thinking, well, maybe I just have to leave Beck and just make these books about Grubbs. It wasn't until I came to Demon Thief. Demon Thief was the key that unlocked it all.
So I don't jump in. So I'm so curious about this because for me, like the 10 books, they work so well. I mean, they're structured as a mirror image of each other. You know, book 1, book 10, book 2, book 9, and
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, 'cause hearing you say that you did this one, then you decided to write this, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it seems as though you were kind of just carrying on, seeing what you could do with this thing when the whole thing seems so well structured. I'm wondering about the
Yes.
the planning.
The way I work is unusual. I'll write a first draft of a book very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But I will then spend between 2 and 3 years editing it. I'll work on other books during that time. I juggle books around. So even though Demon Thief was a 6th book I wrote the first draft of, I was still editing the other 5 books. So I was then able to go in, make changes, create links between them, change things around, and wield it into shape. It's sort of like working. Imagine it's a bit like working with putty or something like that. And I was able to go back in, remold the other books and build the structure out. It was a very, very chaotic time. It was, like I said, I look back at it now and I just don't know because normally my books follow one after the other and it's a straightforward process. Once you get on the path opens up in front of you. With Demon Hunter, there were 3 or 4 different paths, and then it was about trying to bring those paths together. So it was, the way I work allowed me to do it. If I didn't work in that way, it could never have functioned. Because I would have just done Lord Lost and that would have been that book. Then I would have just done Beck and that would have been, But because of the way I work, there was time just about to go in, pull all the strings out, mix it all up, and create order out of chaos.
Yeah.
I'm actually very surprised about it because David and I were discussing actually, as David mentioned already, and it looks like very well pre-planned and structured. And we were so surprised, and especially I was very impressed personally about the mix of genres as well. It is, in case of Demon Hunter, it is fantasy, horror, and sci-fi. And I know David mentioned because he was checking some reviews on the ending of Demon Hunter. I personally didn't do that. And he mentioned that lots of people, maybe not lots of, but some people found it disappointing because somehow they didn't really expect it, but for me, it was the highlight almost of the series because it was so brave and innovative to bring this sci-fi element. And I was actually thinking, how do you come up with these ideas? And when you mentioned already that you were experimenting with the structure of Demon Hunter, but did you have a general idea what you're doing of the series? Did you know about the ending, or you usually just figure it out while you're working on it? Because I was very impressed by the ending. It just
I like the
blew
ending
my
a lot too.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard with a long series. I think you'll always get a good element of your readership who are disappointed with the ending of a big long series because they build up in their head it's going to be something, and if it's not that what they were expecting, some are disappointed. Some are delighted to be surprised. But and to be fair, the vast majority of people I meet over the years they do really like the end of Demonata. Very often when I go to signings and events, I always let people bring up a book to get I'll sign as many books as they bring up, but there's one book for a message. So I always say to people, bring a favourite one. And yeah, quite a few do bring up Hell's Heroes, so it would very often pop up as one of their favourites. I normally have the endings in mind from very early on. So Saga Darren Shan, I knew how it was going to finish. I didn't know how many books it was going to take to get there, or all the things that were going to happen along the way, but I knew what the finish was going to be. With Demonata, I think, again, I knew from quite early on, I think, where I want to get to, where I was hoping to get to. I didn't know how I was going to get to it, or if I'd be able to get to that point. But I certainly, by the time I would imagine of Demon Thief, of Blood Beast and Demon Apocalypse, I probably knew if I was going to go forward with it, where I was going to be heading for. Although, as I said, I didn't know how in hell I was going to get to that point, or how I was going to make it work. Sometimes it can change. With Zombie, I had the end of a Zombie very much in mind, even before I began writing the series. And I even thought I knew what the last line was going to be. It was going to be a very, very bleak ending. And I wrote that ending, but as I was getting close to it, I started feeling it's not the right ending for the series. The character of Beast Smith had changed so much over the course of 12 books. The ending I had in mind just didn't feel right. I wrote it as originally planned, just to be sure, and yet it wasn't. So I had to go back and change it again. Because of the way I write, there was room to do that. With Zombie, I'd actually written the first draft of all 12 books before the first one was published. I finished the whole series, which allowed me then to go back, look for a way to incorporate a new change, set it up so that it didn't just come out of the blue. I always think it's important to, even if readers don't know they're being led to a certain point, that if they go back and read the series again, they do realise actually, yes, they were being led to that point. But you don't just pull an ending out of thin air and just sort of slap it on out of nowhere. There should be lines. I don't always want the readers to see all those lines, but there should be lines going together and connecting at the end. When you go back and reread a series, you should see, oh yes, it couldn't have ended any other way. This is always the way it was going, and it becomes clear when you go back and reread it. You've got to remember, when I work on these big long series, I see them as one big book. Sometimes fans will ask me at events, what's your favourite book out of the Demonata, or the favourite book out of Saga Darren Shan? And I always say I don't have a favourite, because it's one big story for me. And when you're reading books, especially if you read them when they were first coming out, and I read these books quite quickly, every 6 months, the Saga Darren Shan and Demonata were coming out. But that's still, if you start on book one and 3 or 4 years later, you read the final book, unless you've gone back and reread those in the meantime, there's going to be a load of things you're going to forget. And so that's why sometimes the ending will be a bit disappointing. You might think, well, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I signed up for. But I think if you do go back and read it as one big book, you would, one straight after the other, you will see always these endings have been what I've been leading to. In each case, there have been clues, there have been signs. There were no other choices. It was always about getting you to this point in the story.
I think it's also good.
David actually was exercising an idea of making one big book of Demonata. He was checking even the price, how to actually publish it.
Well, I thought
it would be nice, but it would be huge.
Well, I kind of did the number crunching. It struck me to be kind of about the same length as like one of the Brandon Sanderson kind of breaks. And so I did some like a deep dive, like how much would it cost if I could find the raw PDFs or something, or have those sent to me, and then if I tried to strangle that together into one big tome, and it came to this like a 4-figure sum, and it would have to be split into 2 tomes. And I just thought, you know what, maybe for another day. But it's interesting talking about endings.
Also, it's unwieldy, I think. When they come out that big, it's sort of it's hard. It would be nice to see. I love collecting books. I've got a huge book collection up there, so I would love to see it. But you'd have to make the writing very small, the pages very big. Biblical. It would be more of a novelty factor than anything else.
Yeah. It's interesting hearing you talk about endings, because for me, I think what an ending should do really well is leave that discussion. I don't want to kind of go into the huge weeds of what the ending kind of pertains, but what was coming to mind as well was The Dark Terror. If we go back to Stephen King, I think that's another ending where there's just continuous discussion about that ending. I think that's what makes it so brilliant. I have a cheeky question for you, but you'll forgive me because it's not from me, it's from one of the Redditors, so I can just sort of hold my hands up. Someone asked on the Reddit, if you could go back and alter something from Demonata or one of your other works, is there anything in hindsight you'd go, I wish I'd maybe tweaked that a little bit?
A huge amount. It's actually, having said that, there's a team working at the moment on trying to turn Demonata into a TV show. And I'm working with them. So they write the scripts, and then I go through and I rewrite and edit. So I'm working on Demon Thief at the moment. And Demon Thief is the only book of mine where I did rush my process a little bit. I say normally I'll spend between 2 and 3 years working on only one book, and I'll do a first draft. Maybe it might be 4, 5, 6 weeks. I'll set it aside for 7 months. I'll come back. I'll go work out stuff. I'll come back to it. I'll do a rewrite. Set it aside for 7 more months. Come back to it, so on. And I find those gaps are important. Being able to get away from a book. It allows me to be more objective when I come back to it, and I can see what isn't working. I can fix things because of the way I wrote The Demon Artist, and Demon Thief was the 6th book that I wrote. I'd already sold the rights to Lord Loss when I wrote the first draft of Demon Thief, and I knew when Lord Loss was coming out.
Yeah.
And Demon Thief had to come out 6 months later because I wanted the books to come out every 6 months. So I only had a year to work on it. So Demon Thief, there were a few little things in there that if I could go back now, I would sort of tweak. No big changes, but just little things, little explanations for things that weren't explained in the book that, I'm now actually trying to work into the TV show. I'm going through it and making little sort of adjustments to it that I probably would have made if I'd had another year or so to work on the editing process. I did the same number of edits. It wasn't that I sort of did any less work on the book, but I didn't have those big long gaps between it and the time to think about it. Because I'll spend a lot of time staring off into space and mulling things over, and I'll be playing around with little things and asking questions of books that I've written, and is that working? Is that not working? What does it need? And every so often, the answers will come. So Demon Thief is the only one where maybe if I could go back, I would do a big edit, but just a few little tweaks in there of little things that I think it probably would have benefited from. It's still, a really, really good book. I'm happy with it. It's not like it's out there and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's a terrible book. It wasn't that rushed.
I loved it. I loved it.
A few little things in there that I would maybe have tweaked with retrospect.
I'm really sorry because I personally read only the Manata series, so I'm not really aware or familiar with the rest of the series that you already written. But we're planning to read some others. I think starting from this month. Yes, very agree on it. But coming back to the Manata, I was actually wondering, do you personally have preferences in terms of your characters? Do you have favorite characters, or maybe the characters you can relate to most? Because we were discussing it. For instance, for me personally, I love Beck and Lord Loss and maybe Bernabus. I think those are my favorite one, even though David and I have slight disagreement on Lord Loss.
That's about that, yeah.
Because I think he's a bit deeper than David thinks. So we have a bit of a disagreement, but I love them. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I always like writing the villains. They're always great fun to write. Lord Loss, Dan in Zombie, Mr. Tiny, the Saga of Darren Shan.
Mm-hmm.
They get the best lines and the most laughs. It is enjoyable. But one of my favourite characters from the Demon Artist would definitely be Dervish.
Yes.
Dervish. I always put, none of my main characters are based directly on myself, but you will find bits of me in all my main characters. Obviously I get most associated with Darren Shan from the Saga of Darren Shan because, we share the same name. He's no more based on me than any of my other narrators. The one who's probably most like me is, not physically, but mentally, is Colonel Fleck. He's probably one I'm really closest to. But Dervish was me. When I wrote Dervish, this is going back about 20 years or so that I wrote it. And Dervish was how when I was writing the character, I was thinking, this is how I'd love to be sort of 20, 25 years, 30 years down the line. It was sort of a bit of a punk who's sort of aging a bit disgracefully, still not completely settled into middle-aged life and in his slippers and everything. And I went to see Iggy Pop a few weeks ago, last month, up in Dublin in Ireland. And there was a support band called Lambrini Girls, this sort of feminist punk band. They're from Brighton, they're young 20s. And I was in there in a mosh pit dancing around like crazy for an hour. And I was thinking, I was doing that, this is where Dervish would be. I'm with Dervish's people here. And it was nice to see that I have sort of aged that way. So Dervish is one of my favourite ones. He was my favourite back then. And as I get more to the age that he is at, which I'm at the age he was at now, I'm not quite as wild as Dervish, but not too far off either. The same sort of sense of humour.
Have you ever felt the need to have the spikes?
I had a little Mohican in my early 20s. I grew my hair really long in my late teens, so it was like heavy metal sort of length. And then I shaved myself bald to see what that'd be like. And then I grew a little Mohican, but it didn't really suit me. I didn't go for long, spiky one. But yeah, it's all shaking my head. It just, some things look all right, some things don't. And yeah, I wasn't meant to have a Mohican.
Do you know, it's a common through line that I've noticed throughout the Demonata. One thing I really appreciate about the Demonata, and I think this applies to the Saga of Darren Shan as well, is you really seem to enjoy writing sort of mentors, but at kind of one step distance. All the mentor figures in both series are enjoyable, but also aren't your traditional sort of kind Uncle Dumbledore figures. Yeah. I'm wondering if that's kind of intentional, having these sort of messed up fun. I mean, Barnabas is probably the biggest example. Was that intentional, kind of having these mentor figures who are themselves pretty messed up?
I think it's it's nice having the Mr. Miyagi type of mentor where he's all wise and all knowing and very, very calm and stuff. But there's not many of us are that calm in our real lives, and I think it's good to see the flaws in your mentors as well. Mr. Crepsley was a very flawed, fascinating character.
Yeah.
Barnabas, Dervish, they're not straightforward, nice, simple guys. In my Archibald Locks, there was another one called Winston. He was flawed in a different sort of way, he needed different sort of issues. But again, he's not your normal sort of mentor. I just think I try not to be too bland when I'm trying to create my characters. I'm trying to be too vanilla. Sometimes with your main character, you have to make them a little bit vanilla-y, because some of your wilder characters can be off at the fringes. Your main one, you sometimes want them to be more relatable for people. Although in the Demonata, I did go fairly wild with my narrators. It was interesting. I try not to do the normal things. I'm always looking to do something different, even if I'm doing something that's been done 1,000 times before, like vampires. What can I do different with vampires? That relationship between a kid and his mentor. What can I do different with it? I'm always looking to try something new, try something different. I just can't settle into a natural groove like most writers can. Going back to why I don't write, sort of crime books that I like to read. I'm always looking as a writer to flip things on the head, try something different, try something new. Is it going to work? And there's always a risk that it won't work, and sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes I'll try something, and readers don't go with me on that journey. But as a writer, I'm always just picking it. I'm always let's try something new. Let's try something different. Let's tweak things around. Let's go a bit crazy. Yeah, I've never wanted to be Arthur Conan Doyle, who got hired into having to write Sherlock Holmes. As good as they were, he got sick of writing Holmes, killed him off, and he had to bring him back because nothing he could do was as popular. I've never worried about popularity. I know. My most popular series is Saga of Darren Shan. As the Demonata has its huge following, Zombie a bit lesser, Archibald Locks even lesser. But the big one for me is Saga of Darren Shan. I know if I sat down in the morning and wrote more books about my vampires, about Darren and Mr. Crepsley and Mr. Tiny, they'd sell much better than Archibald Locks did. But I've never wanted to put myself up on that cross that Arthur Conan Doyle did, where you're writing because you've got to pay your bills and because readers want it. Whenever I write, I always think, I blank out the readers. I don't think what's going to be popular, what people want. I go with those stories that interest me. I'm looking for something different, something new, something I haven't done before, because it's just what I feel I have to do as a writer.
I feel like it requires lots of bravery, personal bravery on your part as well, because I'm just thinking, if I were a writer, probably I would be a little bit more cautious in terms of my stories, what sort of stories I'm putting out, just because, sometimes there are some mandatory considerations, as you mentioned already, for some other authors. And are you actually brave enough to do something completely different? But I was thinking, because all of your series are quite different, even though majority of them are probably close to the horror genre. But I was thinking, is there any, I don't know, just theoretical question, is there any dream book or dream series that you're still thinking of writing? Do you have any ideas? What you still want to produce so we can be excited about it?
I've got a few different things. I haven't done much the last few years. There was a few different things. The failure of Archibald Locks get publisher, that really threw me and knocked my confidence. I've got two young kids. I spend a lot of time nowadays doing stuff, being a daddy. So that's cut down my writing time. I've been going for very, very productive for a very, very long time. And I sort of got to a point where I just sort of wanted to step back for a bit and have a bit of a relaxation, sort of get off the treadmill, because I've done ones. I never planned to do a big long series. Saga Darren Shan was meant to be a one-off book, maybe a few others. Lord Lost was meant to be a one-off book. I did plan Zombie as a series, and then Archibald Locks. But up until Zombie, I'd never planned to write a big long series. I thought my career was going to be writing one-off standalone books. And suddenly, when you get involved in a series, as I said earlier on, it takes a huge amount out of you. A lot of time, a lot of focus. Your life becomes tied up with this one story for 6, 7, maybe 8, 9 years or more. I'd done 4 of those 5, if you include the Mr. Krebsy books. Which most writers, if you ever do something like that, they'll do it once, maybe twice. I've done it 4 or 5 times. It was, I was feeling a bit drained, so I sort of need to step back a bit. I'm looking now to get back into writing. I've been doing the bits and pieces. It's not that I've stepped away completely, but I'm looking now to, my kids are getting a bit older. I'm getting a bit more time back, and so I do want to start writing more productively again, like I used to do. Where I'm going to go, I don't yet know. I've got some ideas for the mostly standalone books at the moment. I might never write a long series again. If one grabs me, and I'll be happy to run with it. But I've never gone out looking for one. So it could be that there's standalone novels. It's all we're doing from now on. My next book out actually is a picture book for little kids. Really? Terrified Troll. We're releasing it in a limited edition, self-published version to begin with, but I'm hoping to get a traditional publisher on the back of that. That should be coming out in the next few months. We fundraised for it, crowdfunded for it a couple of years ago. I'm going to try different things. One of the things I've sort of next lining up is a book, sort of my most autobiographical book to date, just talking about what it's like being a dad, having and finding it hard being a dad. And
yes,
so my explanation for why I haven't been as productive over the last sort of 10 years or so. I've always found, even though I write fantastical novels, I use my books to sort of look at my life and explore my life. One of my Darren Dash books for adults, it's called An Other Place. It's the weirdest book I've ever written, a sci-fi dystopian novel, which actually has quite a large cult following. And when I published it, I thought, I don't know how this one's going to go down. I think this could be the end of my career as Darren Dash. But readers really liked it. And but it's also a very, very personal book. I was using fantasy and sci-fi to sort of look at where I was in my early to mid-20s and, looking at the world around me and stuff. So, I do have stuff coming out. So I do have stuff I hope to work on and release, but I don't know at the moment exactly what those are going to be. A Darren Dash book after Control. There'll be another Darren Dash book. I was hoping to do it this year, but I ended up spending much longer working on the Demon Art TV series than I had anticipated. So that's pushing me back. So more likely that's going to be 2027, 2026 now.
I do want to ask about the TV series. I know our time is running short, but first of all, I need to say my kids are 4 and 2, and I completely understand the idea of kids swallowing up your time. In Japan, it's the sliding doors, right? And so I'll be typing away at something or working on something, and then suddenly the doors will just do this, and a smiling face will protrude from the door, almost like a kind of a cute version of The Shining, and there's nothing you can do, and it just interrupts your flow. It's not even about taking those 2 minutes. It's like you can't get into that concentrated space very well. So I think anyone who's a parent will utterly understand what you're talking about with the kids thing. But I did want to ask about, I think there's a few things. I have a few questions down below as we get to the end of our hour, that the Shansters on Reddit will execute me if I don't ask. So the first thing is the TV show. What the scripts have been completed, and that's going to be for the first season of a TV show. Is that correct? I don't. How much you can speak on that?
Well, basically, we've written scripts for Lord Lost, Demon Thief, and Beck, but we're discussing amongst ourselves what's the best way to present those.
Yes.
Do we do it just a mini series where it's just Lord Lost? Do we do three series, one series show? So do Lord Lost as 4 or 5 episodes, then Demon Thief, then Beck, or do we mix them up and have it a bit like, say, Game of Thrones, where you've got the 3 elements going at the same time? So you'd have 10 to 15 minutes of Lord Lost, 10 to 15 minutes of Demon Thief, 10 to 15 minutes of Beck. That's what I'm thinking I might be most drawn to, but we haven't tried doing that yet. So at the moment, we've just done the script straight up, 1 script per book. 4 or 5 scripts per book. But once I've done my editing Demon Thief, I'm going to go back through and try and do a mashup version and see what that's like. But then also, it's going to be financing. Can we get money to make this happen? If we do get money, how much do we get? The amount we get will determine how bold we can be. It might be we just get enough to do Lord Loss. It might be somebody says, well, we don't really like that. We love Beck. Can we do Beck as a standalone series? And so there's a lot of balls up in the air at the moment. So, and we just don't know how they're going to come down.
Yes.
So we're working at the moment on doing everything, of doing those 3 books, creating this mega exciting jump-packed series. If we get away with it, it'll be wonderful. But yeah, it's going to be a challenging prospect because of the costs involved. I will say, I haven't spoken about it much on my site because the makers haven't been speaking much about it, but there's also a team working on the saga Darren Shan, and that's much further down the line. And that looks like that could actually get to go ahead in the foreseeable future. We're actually at a point where they are pitching, going to the big studios. They've got a team behind them already. You have quite some very, very experienced heavy hitters in there. So that's actually, no, I've not talked much about it. That is much likelier of the 2 to get to go ahead in the near future. But you never know with these things. I'm always saying to, whenever I talk about it on my social media, don't get too excited because these things can fall apart at a moment and make it spring to life at a moment's notice. It's not something you can really control. There's so many different factors involved. But yes, I'm closely involved with Demon working with the 2 guys. I'm really enjoying it. We're having good fun doing it, and hopefully we'll get further with it. But as for how it's going to be structured, we don't yet know.
DARREN SHAN sounds very exciting, though. I hope you'll manage to do it in this way.
I think it will work. I think it's a different medium. I think it might make it more doable. But there's going to be so many factors. We just don't know. We're going to have to wait and see, and it will depend how much money we get. If we get any money at all, it could end with the scripts. It just we don't know. But we're aiming big. Like I do. I like these 2 guys, Max and Jazz. They're at Jazz. They're aiming big, like I did with the books, and we're shooting for the moon. So whether we get there or not, we'll have to see.
I was going to say, you're saying don't get excited, but nevertheless, here I am sitting here, hoping very much that we can see something. Yeah, I guess the challenge with the Demonata is the chronology of it all, right? That the first few books are set in radically different time periods. But I mean, The Witcher managed it on Netflix, so it's a challenge that could be a strength. Yeah,
there are ways to do it. It's just deciding how you want to do it, and then having the funds to do that.
Yes,
because if you do them all, if you do the 3 together, you basically talk about 3 different crews, 3 different casts. Yeah. It becomes much costlier. So. We're again practical, real world practicalities. Will we get the money to do that? Yes, we might do. It could happen. It's an interesting journey. So I've never been involved because I was never involved with the Cert Freak movie. Yes. I'm not very closely involved with the saga Darren Shan TV show. But this one I'm in there at the moment, sort of part of the team. We really are doing it as a car gash, the 3 of us together working in harmony. So if that continues, and if we get further down the road of it, it could end up. Well, the downside of that is it could end up eating up even more of my time, and sort of my desire to get back to writing books could be pushed further down the road, because if this does take off and I am closely involved with it, this could become a real time eater. Yeah, that'll be a great problem to have if it happens.
Amazing.
Keep the fingers crossed.
Yeah. Just a few different things very quickly. Someone asked about the forum messages on, I guess, your website. They wonder if they've been archived or if there's any way to access the forums. I don't know if you know anything about that. Quite a few people were asking.
And the old message boards.
I guess so.
No, very further away. So because that was they were hosted by different people. I can't remember who they were, but they saw my site linked to the message boards, but the message boards weren't hosted on my site. So I do have all my old newsletters on there. I do a monthly newsletter every month. They're all archived on there. There's a lot of other stuff archived on there as well. But that message boards, sadly, they were of their time and went away to don't know.
The other one someone asked was about the audiobooks. I think the Demonata got books 1 through 6 via audiobook. Is that correct? And 7 through 10 are still... Sorry.
No, it's...
The narrators were fantastic. Those audiobooks. I did them once upon a time.
It was brilliant. I love the audiobooks. The readers, they came out long ago before we had Audible and things like that. So they were just released as audio CDs. They stopped. The publishers stopped at book 6, and I've been spent the last 15, 16, 17 years, whatever it is, trying to get them to finish it, trying to get them to release the whole thing, put it out on Audible, and they're not playing ball with me. They just won't do it. I don't know why. It's very frustrating because the DARREN SHAN, the Cert Freak audiobooks have done really, really well. They were released on Audible there several years ago, and they've got a huge audience. People never heard the books, and I know it's the audiobook world is this massive world.
Yeah,
and I just don't understand why they're not, given that they've got 6 of the books already done, why they aren't going ahead and finishing them off. I was actually chatting by email with the narrator, Rupert Dagar, last year, and he was saying he lives in Australia now, I think it is, and he was saying he'd be all up for coming back and completing them if they ever got in touch with him. And I tried again going to them and trying to use that as a sort of to get them excited. But no, at the moment there's no light at the end of that particular tunnel. Hopefully one day, but
it's
yeah.
It's Ralph Lister who does the Cirque du Freak stuff, right?
Yes.
He does some of the Malazan books, and Malazan is one of my favorite series ever. And he's phenomenal as well. I mean, all the narrators, I know we're having this frustration, but I think Beck, I forget the name of the narrator for the Demon Alpha books, and Ralph Lister, they're all phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Demon Alpha was I just named her a second ago. Now it's got out of my head. I bet you he's gone now. I can't remember. But yeah, but he was. I actually had a female narrator for Beck. But yeah, just as I say, they came out on audio CD, but at the moment, very limbo.
Yeah. That is all from me. Anna, I don't know if you have any kind of final questions as we head towards our end.
Yes, actually, I have one final question. I was just thinking generally, since you mentioned that you're a dad yourself now, so you have children, and maybe for other children on the planet as well who read your books, what you wish your children and other children learn from your books in terms of maybe moral lessons or any other lessons? What you wish as an author for them to learn?
I mean, the message that comes through in all my books is no matter how bad things get, there's always a way forward. Lord Lost isn't a book about a boy fighting demons. Lord Lost is about a boy who loses his family in horrific circumstances and then finds the strength to piece his life back together and carry on. That's what Lord Lost is actually about. Again, Cert Freak, it's about a boy who sacrifices everything to save the life of his best friend and push forward. I create these very dangerous worlds, but my characters always come through it. Not all of them, lots of characters do fall by the waysides, but there is that message of hope that runs through pretty much all my books, certainly all my YA books. It's different when I'm writing for adults, Darren Dash. Sometimes I do go more nihilistic with those particular books. But I think when you're writing for children and teenagers, there has to be that message of hope in there. They have to, and that's what I would hope they get out of it more than anything else. As for my own two, I don't know if they'll ever read them. My wife did read Cert Freak, I think, to my son a few years ago when I felt he was too young to read it, and he didn't read anymore. My daughter's more of a reader than he is, but whether she'll want to read him when she grows up, I don't know, because I'm their dad. I do know that a year or so ago, I was having an argument with my son, and he was raring up at me about something, and I could see he was seething and wanted to hurt me, and he went, "Dad, your books are shit." And then he recoiled in horror, waiting to see what I'm going to do. I just laughed. I thought it was brilliant, so, which annoyed him all the more. I won't force my book on my kids. I remember talking to Charlie Higson years ago. We were doing an event together, and he was talking about his 2 kids. So they're adults now, but I think they were teenagers at the time. And he was answering an audience question. He said, "Look, they don't see me as a writer. I'm just their dad. I'm their chauffeur. I'm their dog's body. They've got absolutely no interest in what I do." And that's what kids are like. We're not idols to our children. And we're not meant to be. We're there. We support them. It'd be lovely to do with my books, and we like them down the road, and we can chat about them. That'd be absolutely great. But I'm not going to hold my breath.
Well, I think that is probably a good point at which to end it. Darren, thank you tremendously for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we look forward to continuing your works, because I think Anna, we're kind of committed now, aren't we? We're just going to keep going on.
Yes,
committed in the best possible way. And I'm so glad I picked them back up actually in my adult life, and kind of. It's been nice also to. I do remember glimpses of where I was when I read each one. I remember being on holiday in the Isle of Mull in Scotland, for example, when I read Beck, and I wonder if that also contributes to just my love of it, because I was in this kind of gloomy sort of Scottish atmosphere. So just hopping over. But yeah, just thank you tremendously for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on. It's been lovely going down memory lane and chatting about these old books, and hopefully I'll have some new ones for you in the distant future.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, guys. And to everyone watching, I will see you on the next video. Goodbye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.